Start share. Oh, can I get permission to share my screen?
I think Lori is the main admin right now.
Y'all see the slideshow? The ridiculous title. Cool. Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for being here. Yeah.
I know that like 99% of the people here are going to know what you're talking about, but for some of us who are non-programmers, could you give us just a little tiny intro? Okay.
Sure. Yeah. That's the slide was going to be an entree into that. Yeah, so let me start with that. So welcome to the talk. I'm going to be talking about, hopefully touching on some aspects of all the stuff that's on the slide. Yeah, so the idea for putting this huddle together was to sort of get on this page how we kind of just like manage the code that we work with. I think a lot of the projects that we have started off as just like a passion project that someone threw together. And as the teams grow, you know, there are some practices that scale pretty nicely from that initial stage to, you know, kind of like where we're at now, and some things that aren't as useful, or there are other practices we can put in place to make things easier for all of us, to make everyone's lives a little bit better. So the main impetus was, yeah, just like how, let me back up. So we manage the code that we work with in a site called GitHub. It used to be itself as like a social network for coding, which is like not really what it is, but it kind of gives you a flavor for how it operates. You basically, it's a central place where everyone submits their code. And it's how we both view the code, work on it, and review the code and merge it into the overall code base as we go. So under the hood, it runs on a piece of software called Git that everyone runs on their local computer to sort of take the changes they're making locally, save them, and submit them against the centralized repository for the code. Each project will have at least one repository in GitHub. A lot of projects will have 2, maybe 3. So oftentimes there's one repository for the web app, there'll be another repository for the mobile app. Yeah. So like I said, the first 2/3 of this talk is going to be looking at how we wrangle the code within that world of Git and GitHub. After that, it's going to be more general topics that sort of look into more of like, how do we name things? How do we do versioning? How do we deploy? What are kind of the automations that we can do to like make this much, to reduce the amount of manual stuff that we're doing to just make everyone's lives easier. That stuff, we'll see how far we get into. I've reserved next week's huddle as well. Yeah, so we might have to just push that off, but we'll see what we get to. Any questions before I move on into the talk itself? Cool, awesome. Yeah, I was trying to come up with a good title for this talk. I was like, I don't really have anything, so I'll just describe what it's talking about. So it's literally what we're talking about here. There's a little bit of everything in here, a little overwhelming, but we'll get through it. So let's move on. So here we go. Yeah, so right now, the main model that we're using to manage our code in GitHub is we're just working with the master branch. So when you start a new repository in GitHub, or like, yeah, well, any repository in Git at all, there's usually just one, what's called a branch called master. And that's just sort of like the main through line that represents your code. So let's go to, actually, let's go straight to the visual representation. So yeah, there's master. So like I said, like you initialize a repository, it gives you master by default. So great, I'm gonna start writing code. So I'm gonna make a couple commits. Each one of these dots is a commit. That's a certain chunk of code that we have said we'd like to save as part of the history for this repository. You can think of Git as tracking sort of arrows in time, except that they're not arrows in time, they're arrows in commits. So each step along the way is another chunk of code that you've committed to the project. I'm just saying, this is something I'd like to hold on to. Yeah, for the most part, whatever you commit to the project is kind of, especially as you make more commits, down the line, the code that you've written earlier ends up being integral to what comes later. So it becomes increasingly harder to like revert anything in the past. So it's kind of like life, can't really change what came in the past, but there may be other, well, yeah, we'll get into that. So yeah, so that's sort of what these dots are. So instead of starting off, you just have the one branch, make the commits there, great. Start adding more than one person to that project, though, and what you can start doing is you can break off to a separate branch. So in these diagrams that I'll be showing, anything that's this black line, that's going to be a feature branch. All coders familiar with this, but whenever you're working on a new feature, you'll cut a new branch off of your main one, which in this case is master. You'll give it a name, and you'll make your commits locally. So this is happening on someone's local computer. Once they're done with it, they'll push it back up to the repository, and GitHub keeps track of all the different branches that are being pushed to it. At this point right here, the original coder will issue what's called a PR, a pull request. So that's a request for other members of the team to take a look at the code, to review it, make any suggestions that need to be made. At which point, you could maybe add some more commits that respond to that request. Once you've gotten that review, everyone signs off on it. You can then do what's called a merge. So that can merge the work that you have on this branch back into the main line. So now at this point right here, all 5 of these commits are on master. So yeah, pretty simple. We just have the master branch and we have the one feature branch. As you add more people, you get to have other branches, right? So this is maybe another coder. They're doing their own branch. Looks like they've merged it here. All right, we're adding more people, but it's still pretty straightforward. As we go on, maybe there's another. So this original developer, they decide, well, I did this feature, but I want to make some changes to it. I want to add some more things. So they decide, okay, I'm just going to cut a new branch off of my existing feature branch, and I'll add these commits to that. Which, yeah, you could totally do. Getting a little more complicated, but we're still doing all right, right? What happens though, if at this, let me go back. So maybe you're sitting here on this commit, and you realize, oh wait, like I'm working on, feature A over here, and feature B, say. There's actually a change in this commit that I actually need to do my work up here. If you look at the chronology here, the work that this branch right here is based off of, it goes along this branch this way, right? So this work right here was merged into master before any of this work existed on master. So, you know, I'm kind of at a quandary now. Like, how do I pull the code from here into this branch? Yeah, so let's actually, let me pause for a second, see if there are any questions. And then maybe I can open up. What are some ways we might think about pulling something from this commit into this branch?
Does you have a question?
Yep.
I see that like GitHub, if I'm not wrong, they're kind of like changing like the conventions, right? They changing the master for the main, right?
Yeah, you're way ahead. I'm going to get to that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all right.
Thanks for being on top of it. But yeah, we'll get to that. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think the first two will be merged. Then after that, the third one will be.
Okay. Which one are you saying would be merged?
I don't know, how can I show?
Yeah.
The first two will be merged into master.
At this point, these first two are already merged into master at this point. Yeah.
Okay.
So
So we'll merge the third one. I think that's it. Yeah.
We could.
Sorry.
Hey, go ahead, Nick. Yeah.
I was gonna say, create a new branch. I don't know if I'm getting more confused with the lines or just.
Yeah. Where would you cut the new branch off of?
From this dot right here. I can't even. I'm the dot. Well, the branch up north. There you go. The north branch.
There you go. This one. Okay. So you cut the branch off of that.
I'm just guessing.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah. So at that point, you're still sort of limited to this lineage, though. So you're not getting down to this one down here. You're on the right track, though, in that like there's probably some other like form of branching we'll want to do.
You could create a new branch off of master and then cherry pick your commits from that top third branch, maybe.
Yes. So you could cut a new branch off of master, and then maybe just like, or you could even just like git pull on this, while you're on this branch, and just like maybe just pull this commit, maybe you try to pick that.
Right.
That's a possibility. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, if it's like a grand, if there's nothing in this commit that's like conflicting with like what you're doing outside of what you want, then yeah, that you could do that. Yeah.
Why just like a merge is not working? For example, when we say like we merge the master to our branch and getting the that changes to that point we are.
Yeah. That's probably going to be the easiest thing. I think, yeah, that's probably the most straightforward. So basically we just take a merge directly from master to our branch, and then we've got the stuff, right? That's probably what I would do in this case. What I have seen, though, sometimes I think is we'll do something like this. So this branch here that is based off of this branch. And I know I want this commit. So I'm going to basically just make a copy of this branch, which goes all the way back to here, and then rebase it on top of either this commit or this commit. So that basically makes a whole new copy of all of these these commits and puts them all here. This is an example of something that we shouldn't be doing. So I'm having this just as an example of like things to avoid. Yeah, so it's kind of a hypothetical, but it's not out of the realm of possibility. Yeah, so yeah, like Sinan said, yeah, probably the most short thing would be for sure, but this is also like something you could hypothetically do. I would not recommend it for a number of reasons, and we'll get into that in a second. Yeah, I think that's, yeah. Yeah, so maybe I've done this rebase, but I also wanted to keep this just in case like we wanted to keep that around. I don't know why, but maybe that would be useful. So now we have this situation. What happens though if we've got like I've started working on this branch now, but I've left this in place because maybe I kept it in place consciously or just forgot about it. And maybe someone had checked this out for some reason and made a commit on this original branch. See here, and now we want, so like, okay, now we finished out this one, but now we have basically a weird situation where we have a copy here, we have a copy here, but we have, there's like a discrepancy with this commit. But now, let's say, someone wants to work with this original branch for some reason, but they want this commit. You could also do a merge here, but if you were to use the same rebasing thing, you move it on top of here. At this point, I have no idea what's going on with this mess. And the thing, that's an issue by itself. We can figure that out. But the thing that I'm most worried about right now is like, this is all really closely tied to master. And anytime you're doing basing, you're basically rewriting history. And it's very easy to somehow duplicate commits or move things around, especially if you're rebasing, like doing this kind of merge, this kind of move. So say these two commits touch the same file as this commit. If you do this move, you run into the possibility of running into a merge commit or a merge conflict in the same file when you try to move this commit on top of this one. So you address that. Cool, I got that figured out. But then maybe you hit the same thing with this one. And if you have a whole chain of those, you end up in a situation where you're like at the end, like, I don't even know what I did. What I want or what I should have, it becomes kind of an ugly mess.
Question.
Yeah. Can I ask it?
Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
Oh, it was quick. Mine is quick, I think. I think we're talking about doing a rebase in that situation. If you were to do a merge, you still get those merge conflicts anyway, right?
Yeah, but you'd have fewer, potentially fewer. Yeah, yeah. I think at some point, if you're working in the same file, merge conflicts will be an issue at some point. If you're relying just on merges, then that'll most likely happen at the point where you're merging into the main branch. If you're doing rebases, that might end up happening with every single commit you have on the branch that you're rebasing.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Sinan?
Yeah, I was just gonna say about this rebase, like we kind of like all this like branching and stuff, the idea like we are keeping track of the like what we done actually in the things, but then with this rebase kind of like rewriting the history, It's kind of like, doesn't feel like we are kind of like changing the what we did, or
Yes. You're also ahead of the curve. I will address this later. I never rebase. Rebasing is a bad idea. Yeah. This is an example of what not to do. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. I'm mainly including this stuff as an example of like things that might happen right now. So there's a lot of like issues with like rebasing, right? And that by itself is an issue, but also I think the point that I'm also trying to get at as well is that like this stuff is really close to master, so like if somehow you pull in master and you rebase on master, you merge master, you're probably going to run into issues down the line if you haven't already. Or like Johan called out, main, but we'll get to that as well. So in order to like move this kind of complexity away from master, there's an alternative model for working with branches, or we introduce something called the dev branch. And in order to sort of describe what we're doing with that, I want to enlist the help of Mr. Alec Baldwin here. If you've ever seen the movie Glengarry Glen Ross, it's actually all the characters in it are horrible. This guy's pretty Trumpy, look at his hair. But there's a really famous quote from that movie, right? Like A always B, B, C closing, right? Like always be closing, ABC. But in this case, we want to be always be closing PRs onto dev, A, B, C, D. Always close your PRs to dev, not master. And I'll go through an illustration of how we do that. So in addition to the master branch, we're going to have a dev branch. And the idea is we're going to be basing all of our ongoing dev work onto dev and keep master as clean as possible. And only reserve it for times when we're actually pushing code to production. And that'll help sort of like keep us aware of like what what we have on production, and B, just like I said, like just keep things as clean as possible. So we can abstract all of that ugliness onto dev itself. So yeah, if you're working with more than one main branch, if we really screw up dev and it's all shot to hell, we can like rewrite it, we can come back to it, we can like reinstate it. Whereas if you're working with just one branch, screw up master, you're kind of screwed. So let's get into it. So instead of having, like I said, the initial commits on master, you have the initial string of commits on dev. So here, like I said, anytime we're merging, so anything that we're writing goes to dev, and anything that comes into master should only really be in the case where we're trying to deploy something. So in this case, let's say we've come to the end of a sprint and we might want to make a deployment. At that point, we do a merge from dev to, so we basically collected everything from that past sprint onto dev, and we merge to master, we do a deployment. Boom, it's out in production, it's out in the wild. Great, start a new sprint. So this, at this point, is the next 2-week cycle where we do more code, right? Well, I'll explain this a bit later. But basically, as soon as we do a deployment, we pull the updated code from master back onto dev, just because dev has the latest, is up to date with what's on production, right? Okay, so cool. All right, so let's get started. We'll make a new branch. We'll start doing code. Yeah, so we're going, sitting pretty. But boom, what happens actually? Let's go back here. At some point, actually, after we've deployed, realize, oh no, something's breaking on production. The site's down. No one can do anything. We got to fix something, right? Normally, what you do is you would just create a new branch on master and just do everything there. But by splitting out dev from master, that frees us up to do like the hot fixes on a branch that we make directly off of master. So that means that we can continue to. Yep.
Somebody has a question. I think this.
Okay. Sure.
Oh, yeah. Oh, sorry. I had my hand up. Is it somebody else? We can take other people's questions. Are probably more important than mine. Were you talking about me, Alex?
It seems like you have your hand up. Yeah.
Yes, I did.
Yeah.
Just for clarification for me, I know everyone else probably gets this, but just is this like, okay, so working in Vamos, the dev is the sandbox that's on Heroku that we give organizations at first where they can sort of play around in it?
So there are a couple ways we can, so there's yes and no. So there's dev and production, basically environments, and there's master and dev branches within GitHub. So a simple way to handle it would be to have one-to-one correlation. So like master would go on production, dev would go on dev. You could also set it up with a dev, staging, and master or production set of 3 environments. Well, actually, we'll get to that at the end of the slideshow. For like really like content heavy sites, actually, it's common to have a dev environment where you're basically pushing the dev branch. So that's really just sort of like pushing code around, making sure it all fits. There's a staging environment, which I think especially for Vamos, that might be useful to have a separate one where we just reserve that for QA and for clients to sort of like do the sandbox stuff. And then, this is actually a model that also came about from like newspapers or so really content heavy outlets where they can basically have their content set up in an environment that's as production-like as possible without being actual production. So then once you have everything ready, you can push from there to actual production. So yeah, so you could do that, or if it's a simpler app, you just have dev and production.
Okay, thanks.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. Thank you.
Okay, cool.
I have a question. I mean, it's more like, like to know if I'm understanding well. So basically, like all the code that we're developing, we're going to put everything like on the dev and we're going to pull from dev. But master is going to be kind of like a code that is going to be managed like by like those people that are like kind of like in charge of like doing like the production stuff.
No, yeah, so I'm trying to think of a good analogy. Yeah, I think it's basically what you're saying. So like the nitty gritty, like day to day, like just pushing code, working on it, figuring his stuff out, that's all going to be on dev. So that's our dirty room. Okay? And yeah, so like the master branch is ideally something, it's like a clean room for like satellites, right? Like you're building a satellite, you want it to be as clean as possible. Because you're getting ready for it to like go out into the universe, right?
Okay. So it's basically kind of like the master is like code that is being like tested, that it is working, and that we are kind of like sure that it's gonna work. But at the same time, we're gonna be pulling like every day from dev, not from master.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So basically, master should be a reflection of what's on production. So if you want to know what your users are seeing out in the wild, you could pull master locally and just like run that. And that should be a reflection of like how things are actually working in the real world. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah. Any other questions before I go on? Okay, cool. So like I said, oh yeah, like Johan said, yeah, we're doing most of our work on dev. That frees us up to, if we need to do a hot fix, to just like make sure that the site's not breaking, we could do that on a branch. We break off of master. And just like we broke it off master, we just merge it right back into master again. That's for like dire emergencies. Yeah, and even then, we still probably want to like test it out on like a sandbox environment, just to like make sure we kick the tires, make sure it's fine. Like before, we merged it back into master. Now we do a deployment. At that point, what should we be doing?
I think we should get the changes to dev branch because we don't have that quick changes.
Yes, perfect. Yeah. So yeah, we're gonna pull that from master back onto dev. So now dev is up to date. Yeah, perfect, Sinan. We're continuing to do feature work on dev. Cool. Yeah. So now we come to the end of the sprint. We have all the stuff that we've merged into dev. Now we're setting up for the next deployment. So we'll go ahead and do that. And we've deployed. We have the changes back onto dev. We're all set. Now we can start with a new set of branches. Should actually be this commit, but whatever. So do I have? Yeah. So regardless, maybe we were a little we jumped the gun and we cut it off a little bit early. That's fine. We could also just, like we talked about before, just merge from dev onto our branch. What happens though, if someone still basically, if they haven't updated their dev yet locally and they've made a new commit and they want to get this ready. Well, I don't know. We've already like gone through that. Basically, we just do a merge from dev. So this is exactly that, right? So instead of like trying to take this commit and like rebasing it somewhere else, we're just going to take a merge directly from dev onto dev. Now we're set.
So question there.
Yeah.
What are the commands to do that?
I would just, so if I'm on this branch,
Yeah.
I would git checkout dev,
Okay.
git pull, make sure that we have the latest dev, switch back to this branch, and then do git merge dev.
Okay. Because at this point,
Yeah.
what I use, if I'm behind something like that and things have been merged in our case to master, because we don't have dev yet. If I'm ready to make a pull request, so I can be at the same level as master. So there's nothing like I'm not behind or anything. This is where I started doing rebase, and it works like really good for me because I just do a rebase. And if I didn't work on any of those files that were merged into master, it just basically takes me to the same level as master because now I just pulled everything.
Yeah.
And I have all the commits that that were committed to the master one. So now I'm up to master. I have everything that master has now, and then I have my work. It's basically like if I had just branched out of master, not from back there, but
right. So if you moved this commit up to here, basically,
yeah, wherever. Yeah. So at that point, I don't have anything that I'm behind or anything. I do a pull request and it works fine because I'm not behind.
Yeah, I mean that's yeah, for the case where all the changes that have happened up here don't touch your files,
right?
That's going to be the same thing for this case too. You're not gonna have any issues.
Right. If I touch something, it brings me back to with like some merge conflicts that I have to take care of.
Yeah. That will also happen here, but it's just the once. Whereas like if every single one of these commits
have, yeah.
Yeah, so it's the
Right.
same files, and I've moved all of these up. Depending on how each merge conflict is resolved, you might have to do a new one for every single commit, right? I don't know. I've had
that.
plenty of times where that's been the case, and like this is a nightmare. I don't ever want to do this again.
It tries
Yeah.
to resolve everything from every commit if it has if it has a conflict.
Right, chronologically, like in order. Yeah.
Yeah.
Whereas like if you do it this way, there's just the once, right?
Okay.
And usually, like if you have a commit, if you have a conflict here, probably also what you're going to see, you're basically preempting any merge conflicts you might see in the PR itself. So by addressing it here, you're probably not even going to see it when you do the PR itself. It's just one and done, basically. And the other real big reason to do this instead of rebasing is that you're not rewriting history. I think that's the biggest reason why I really tend to stay away from rebasing, is that like part of the whole point of Git is to like have a multi-threaded sense of like the actual history of how each branch was developed, each commit in time. If you're monkeying around with like the code that's in each commit, that's like the more changes you make there, the farther away it gets from like what actually happened, right? And it becomes really hard to know what the actual history is. Whereas if you just leave it in place and just like pull in the latest to your branch, you don't have to worry about any of that, right? Like that stuff stays in the past. We're not doing any kind of like, I guess I should have done like a Back to the Future theme, because that would have been fun. So you're not, running into your old self and like creating a paradox that destroys the universe,
So I have a question there.
Yeah.
So I know those branches are there. Like if I rebase, I think what you're saying is that I rewrite history. Well, those commits are still there, right? If I have a merge conflict, it goes into every commit that I have, that I may have a merge conflict. But when you resolve that conflict, you put another commit, right? Is that what you're saying about rewriting history?
Oh, well, so there's a couple of things I'm talking about. So like, you might have the same changes in each commit, but like when you rebase, it actually becomes a different commit with a totally different hash, and it puts it in a different sequence. Like you might have same structure, the overall like same structure here, but it's going to be a totally new set of commits mostly with the same changes, except for if you do have merge conflicts that you're addressing, like depending on how it resolves, you might actually have like the shadow version of this that you've rebased might end up having a different actual set of changes inside of it.
Depending on how you
resolve the conflict. Yeah. At that point, it becomes really hard to know like what's reality here, what's truth, and so my approach has been to just like not even broach that possibility. I'm not going to worry about it. Merging directly from dev gets me exactly where I need to go. And leave it at that.
Okay.
Yeah, just
not a question, but I can say it for later.
Okay. Well, I mean, do you want to go ahead and just ask it now?
Well, I run into the problem where sometimes I either do a pull or merge, and for some reason I basically pull the files, and when I make a pull request, I don't know if this has happened to anyone else, but it seems like I did the changes even though I didn't make the changes. And that's I don't know how that happens, but I've seen it like in me and then other devs that I worked before, where they either try to like pull so they can merge into master or something like that.
Yeah, sometimes it'll show up with like both of your avatars there.
Yeah, so sometimes
Yeah.
the work that I have done, maybe someone else pulled. I'm not sure actually exactly the workflow, but it comes like their files that they change because they make the latest commit.
Yeah, I think there's probably a couple ways that might happen. One way is definitely rebasing someone else's commits. You're basically like recommitting the same stuff that someone else worked on. So I think that's one way. And I have seen that with like, it's like if you have like 3 or 4, go back. If you have 3 or 4 branches stacked on top of each other and you're, pulling from them, that might also happen as well. I'm not as worried about that because in the end, it's the same commit, and yeah, like, yeah.
Yeah, I just didn't. That had been like something that I had seen before because I've seen it before.
I've seen it too.
Not exactly sure how it happened sometimes.
Yeah, I think it's when things get complicated, right? You have multiple people working on the same branch. Maybe you're like taking their work and adding on top of it, and then someone else is merging that. As long, my main consideration is as long as we have the original information as we've submitted it, and that's sort of like the integrity of our data, basically, right?
I see. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. This is a really good conversation, though. Thanks for asking the questions, Jorge.
Yeah, thank you. So I also have those questions. Like,
any other questions? I say, go ahead.
Just I feel like I go back and forth because I used to do a lot of pull and merge and things like that, but I will come into those problems sometimes, and then also merge conflicts where it would be so many files sometimes in that one merge conflict. And I don't know, as time went on, I would just hear about here and there also about rebase. And then some people, I don't personally do yet because I don't know much exactly, but some other people like praise it and some people don't like it. Like one of those tools, like you either really like it because whatever reason, or you don't think it's a good idea because of whatever reason.
Yeah.
But that's like my experience. So when I started learning about rebase, I was like, oh, I feel like I started seeing like kind of the pattern, what it does. So then I kind of use both now, but I use rebase, especially when I'm about to go into like my main source of truth, in this case, master. And
see,
I said, it has worked for me just fine now that I don't have as much problem.
I would say, especially when you're touching master, I want to be as far away as I can from something that's gonna like potentially mess with history. Like I really don't want to mess up master.
Okay. Yeah, maybe I need to look more into that because I didn't know it was messing up with history. And I need to look into that.
Yeah, I can send you some links if you want. That would be helpful. I think in the end, it's like a lot of these kind of like either or things, like tab spaces, squash, don't squash, all that kind of stuff. But I kind of heavily never, which actually I'm gonna have Alec reinforce. Always merge, never rebase. That's what I tell myself. Just always merge. It's like the most mundane thing. You don't have to worry about history, and just like everything else, just keep merging. Don't squash, don't rebase, just merge. Yeah. Any more questions before we go on? Okay. Why did I include? Oh. Go ahead, Johan.
Okay. No, never mind. There was like a question in the chat, but it's okay.
Oh no, go ahead and.
No, there was a question in the chat, like for
Oh, okay.
Andrea. Yeah, man.
Let me check. Okay, I have a question for you. I had been using Rebase most of the time. I got an application of my previous commits from my old branch to my new branch on time of creating PR. That's why it gives more merge conflict most of the time. Yeah, exactly. That's kind of what we're talking about before, where yeah, you're like, especially if like there's been a commit after the work that you did on a file. Every commit that you rebase on top of that later commit is going to run into issues with the one you're skip flagging over. Yeah. 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 I also agree. It might be some cases when you're working locally on your own things, but definitely shared branches. Yeah, I want to keep it clean. Yeah. Cool. I'm open to keep this conversation going if y'all want. But yeah, let's move on for now. I'm running out of time, so I'm just going to do a couple more things before I go, and we'll have the rest for next time. Actually, let's go on to the next thing. Well, yeah. So before we got into the discussion about rebasing, so this was the last time. This was the last state that we had the chart. There's one more class, I guess, of branches that we could have in addition to master dev, hotfix, and feature branches is release branches. So like this hotfix had before, it took 3 commits to fix the issue. I think especially when you start having like a real dedicated QA process, you can set it up so that before you do the merge to master, you can actually cut off a release branch and test that with your QA team. And then if you find any issues that are still left over, you can go ahead and commit that to the release branch. And then you'd set up the release and then deploy that to master, which in this case, we saved 1 commit. There might still be other things that you would have to hotfix, but that's one more way to like reduce bugs that we're sending out into the wild. But I think we'll start without that for now. We can just do master and dev. Moving on to John's point, GitHub has made the change with the Black Lives Matter uprising in the summer to, I think with a lot of other parts of the tech world, to do what we can to move away from racially coded language. So, like calling things master, the corollary being at some point there's probably a slave. So especially with like database design, that's a really common pattern that gets applied. They have started moving away from master to calling it main. Heroku also recognizes both master and main now. So that's also, I mentioned this a few months ago, but we haven't made that switch yet because we've still been on the legacy master branch. So now that we're going to be making the switch, I think once we get onto dev, we will make the switch to using main as well. Yeah. Any questions about that?
So, for example, like in the new project and the old project that, for example, like I've been working or something like that. So it will be kind of like convenient to change like the master into main, like as a main branch, or
yeah,
or should I keep that
just
like master as it used to be?
So leave that up. So basically, at least with my projects, I'll basically make main out of master and I'll push that to the repositories. So since we're moving to this dev-centric model, you most likely won't need to even pull this branch locally. So you might not even need to worry about it. If you do, we'll just do git checkout main, and that'll get you up to date. You can also just drop like delete master. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, I just want, like for convention, I don't know, like I just wanted to know like what is best, Thank you.
Yeah. That's why I've waited till we are on dev, right? Because then you won't need to work with master at all or main at all. Yeah. Yeah. Like I said, I have a whole other set of slides to get through, but we'll do that next time. For further reading about this branching stuff, though, I've taken most of the ideas here from this resource. This is a blog post from looks like 10 years ago, and there's been updates to how things get deployed in cloud world that make this model a little bit less applicable. But I think this is a good resource to read up on, because it's basically an adapted version of this model that I went through in the slides here.